Alright, so allow me to paint a picture for you guys.
Let's have some fun. Let's get crazy here.
You just got your new to you STI, and yes, I said new to you because those dirty dogs at Subaru decided to stop making the EJ engines. You're cruising down the road, enjoying your night, one hand on the steering wheel like a badass, the other hand on your girl's lap, only lifting it off to shift gears in your sweet new 6-speed. You find a nice straightaway, and you look over at your girl, and with the most coarse voice you could muster, you say,
"Check this out."
You drop a gear, hoping to disappear, and absolutely just mash the pedal into the floor. You're going, you're doing that sick pull, when all of a sudden... Alright, now that's a little exaggerated, but here's a real worst case scenario of what would actually happen to you. Alright, now here's a more subtle but actual real world scenario of what would actually happen if you blew up your Subaru.
It blew up!
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in this world and whenever you may be watching this video. My name is Jacob, and welcome to Canadian STI. So as I said in my first video, I didn't want to be another one of those guys to make another how to make your Subaru reliable video, but who has two thumbs and is going to do exactly that anyway? This guy. So also I want to take a second before I get right into things and plug myself and just say that if you guys like the channel, like the content that I've been posting so far, which is only like really one informative video and another video of me just rambling, I really appreciate if you guys subscribe. It helps me out greatly. You don't even have to turn the bell notifications on. You can just hit subscribe and leave it alone, and it helps me super greatly. So I really would appreciate that, guys. But without further ado, let's get into everything and we'll go over how to make your Subaru reliable. Alright, so it's a new day as you can see, but first up on our list is driving style. Now, I know you just got your sweet new STI and you want to go off and show off to your friends, your family, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, the unsuspecting civilian walking down the street minding their own business, and do those sweet, sick, nasty pulls in those driver-controlled center diff lock donuts. Say that one 5 times fast and tell me you don't twist your tongue. But the point is, you need to do it safely and within the car's boundaries, because at the end of the day, these cars are fun, they are built, but they're not invincible. I would be absolutely lying if I said that whenever I first got my STI, I wasn't out there doing some sweet, sick, nasty pulls. Woo! This isn't the cops.
Yeah.
But the point is, I now practice what I preach and I stay considerably safely and within the car's boundaries because I know these cars are susceptible to some things. Now, I see a lot of the times one of the biggest contributing factors of people's cars blowing up is the way they drive them. Because I mean, if you're just out there always romping on it and not a care in the world and, you know what I mean, whipping around, then you're most likely like going to blow up. I mean, it's inevitable in a sense depending on how you drive. So when talking about driving style, keep it safe, keep it within the car's boundaries. Obviously, don't hurt yourself either because who knows, you might wrap yourself around a pole and nobody wants that. So have some safe fun where you can, but let's be real. It's not necessarily necessary to get into boost at every single red light you stop at. Alright, so coming in at number 2 on this list is maintenance. When you first get your STI, whether it be from some guy on the Facebook marketplace, a secondhand dealership, or even used from Subaru itself, I always recommend checking up on those maintenance items when you initially get your car if you have the money, tools, and know how to do so. You may be a little bit more safe as far as getting your car from a dealership goes, but I've seen some cases along the way where even dealerships say that they have done this maintenance and it really hasn't been done. So always make sure to get your Carfax report if you do get it from a dealership, and I think there's somewhere else along the way where you can get a Carfax report, or if you get it used from Facebook Marketplace, always inquire to the guy about what's been done to the car and get the record, any records that you can pertaining to maintenance items. Moving on to keeping and maintaining your car, there's kind of 2 ways you can go about it. You can follow Subaru's recommended service intervals, and I'm pretty sure you can find that within one of your service manuals that you have in your car, or there's a website you can actually go to see that based on your mileage or even time of driven, so 1 or 2 years and so on and so forth. I'll actually have that link down below if you guys want to check that out. And the other good way to go is following the enthusiast path, and that's the path that I recommend, because yes, it may cost a little bit more money to change your fluids and so on quicker, but it'll keep your car staying reliable and running very smoothly. Here's a great list of enthusiast maintenance intervals that you can follow from Tanner over at Smedia. So first up on the list is an oil change at every 3,000 kilometers. Now I know it's going to cost a lot more money to do it compared to doing it at 5,000 or even 10,000 if you're running synthetic oil or something like that, but it's highly recommended that you follow the 3,000 kilometer interval to make sure that your car is always running reliably and smoothly. Next up is transmission and differential fluid. Now, as you drive along, your gear shifting is going to get notchy. And so the best thing that you can do, and I mean your transmission is going to be affected as well for how much you drive and so on and so forth. But the best thing to do is change your transmission and differential fluid out every 20,000 kilometers to ensure that your gear shifting is nice and smooth and not too notchy. Next, we have a coolant flush at every 15,000 kilometers because you want to make sure that your coolant is doing its job and cooling down your engine so it's not getting too hot, and old coolant over time will become less efficient in cooling your engine, so I recommend changing that every 15,000 kilometers. And last up on the list is spark plugs. So it's recommended from an enthusiast point of view to change your spark plugs every 10,000 to 15,000 kilometers because you don't want to be experiencing misfires and all that kind of stuff due to bad spark plugs because they oxidize over time, the little tips. So it's always recommended to change those out at 10 to 15,000 kilometers. I'll be coming out with a video in the future going over all these maintenance items and how to change them, so definitely be on the lookout for that. So coming in at number 3 on this list is air oil separators, or AOS for short, and I'll very quickly explain the issue that the AOS fixes. So as the cylinders in your engine fire as you drive your car, there are gases that are obviously created in your combustion chamber, and sometimes those gases will blow by the piston rings and create pressure in your crankcase. To relieve this pressure that's created in your crankcase by blow-by gases, amongst other things, your car is equipped with a positive crankcase ventilation system, or PCV system for short. The PCV system relieves that pressure created by those blow-by gases, amongst other things, and recirculates it back into your system through your intake tract, into your cylinders, and so on. Along that whole process, the PCV system actually picks up oil vapor as the blow-by gases pass through your crankcase, and it gets recirculated right back into the system through your intake tract and so on. This can cause issues such as oil buildup in your engine, and in turn will lower your fuel octane rating and possibly cause improper detonation. And you do not want improper detonation, as that can possibly damage your engine. So the AOS does what its name implies. It separates the air, or blow-by gases, from the oil, or oil vapor, and then recirculates everything back in your system in the correct place that it should be in. Even the dailiest of drivers should get one of these, as it will immensely help your engine's longevity. Some of the great brands out there that sell air oil separators are first IAG, who make the Street and Competition series. There's Cobb, which is actually just essentially a rebranded IAG air oil separator. We have Perrin, which makes a pretty good air oil separator. We have Crawford Performance, and then Grimspeed. I should note that IAG has the Street series and the Competition series, and in most applications, you are going to use the Street series unless you're shooting for over 600 wheel horsepower and do not plan to daily drive this on public roads. Do be aware that IAG has discontinued their Competition series because instead of the Street series recirculating everything back into the system, the Competition series actually vents those gases to the atmosphere. There are still some Competition series AOSs and conversion kits for your Street series AOSs out on the market, but do be aware that if you plan to pick one of these up, you will need to tune for it, as it does change the amount of air that goes into your intake, as well as removes the need for a PCV valve. And we should all know by now that anything that changes the amount of air going into your engine needs a tune. It's also worth noting that Grimspeed AOSs are not recommended within the community necessarily. I can't tell you why, and it's not to bash Grimspeed because I love Grimspeed products and I actually plan to use a lot of them in my build, but it was worth mentioning here. I'll also link the IAG Street Series AOS below, as that's the one I see used the most. But if you're going for any other one in the market, you're typically looking to spend around $600 to $700 Canadian depending on which one you want to get. I'll also provide some information regarding AOSs below, and I urge you to check those out just to become more familiarized with what you're putting in your car and spending all your hard-earned money on. 'Tis a new day once again, however, I'll continue on by saying, now if you plan to keep your STi mostly stock, then you can probably get away with what was already listed, so good driving style, proper maintenance, as well as the air oil separator. However, moving forward, the rest of this list is mainly going to be geared towards those who want to modify their STIs or even track them. You can still do some of the mods that I'll be going over next if you plan to keep your car mostly stock, and I'll kind of dive in a little bit to the applications that they're used in so you can make the decision whether or not you want to put them on your mostly stock car. Alright, so coming in at number 4 on this list is actually a whole kind of subcategory of reliability parts that you can put on your car, and this is all pertaining to cooling. So there's actually 2 main reliability mods that I put into the subcategory of cooling, as well as some little extras, but first off we're going to go over the cylinder 4 cooling mod. I can actually show this one right here because I have a brand new one that I plan to install soon enough, so be on the lookout for that video. But in simpler terms, whenever we're talking about the EJ engine, cylinders 2 and 4 on the left hand side of the block don't get as adequate of cooling as cylinders 1 and 3. So the cylinder 4 coolant mod was created to screw into the left hand side of the block and tap into the heater core line to promote better coolant flow through that left hand side of the block. So it essentially reduces temperatures in cylinders 2 and 4, therefore balancing temperatures across the whole engine and improving the system's efficiency. When talking about cylinder 4 coolant mods, the only one that you should be going for is the Get a Dom Tune cylinder 4 cooling mod, because it has high quality parts and it has actually a metal T-fitting right here, opposed to some of the cheaper options such as Torque Solution cylinder 4 coolant mod, which actually only has plastic T-fittings. I'll link the cylinder 4 coolant mod down below for anyone who wants to check that out. So next up in the subcategory of cooling is radiators. Your stock STi radiator is sufficient for cooling your stock STi, but when it comes to pushing more power and pushing the engine's limitations, it's obviously going to get hotter. To combat the hotter temperatures, it'd be a great idea to upgrade your radiator. Also, the upper portion of your stock STi radiator is actually made out of plastic, and so over time the plastic can deteriorate and cause issues, so the radiators that I'm going to go over and link below are actually full aluminum, so you won't have to worry about that anymore. When talking about radiators, the 2 brands that I always see on the market are Koyorad and Mishimoto. And these radiators will boost your cooling efficient up to around 30%, so definitely plan to put one in your build. Either Mishimoto or Koyorad are both great radiators, and so you can make the decision on which one you want to get. I'll have them both linked down below either way. Now I should probably take the time to mention that these cooling mods will not actually bring your coolant temps down, it just promotes better cooling efficiency. If you're looking to actually bring your coolant temps down, I think Mishimoto actually has a thermostat upgrade, but it's not necessary unless you're going like full on all out on your build or plan to track your car. It is worth mentioning though. Last up in the subcategory of cooling is the little extras I mentioned before, and now you don't necessarily need them, but you can make the decision whether you want them or not. First up is upper and lower radiator hoses. If you have an older STi or even a 2015 plus and want to spruce up your engine bay by replacing those old rubber susceptible to dry rot radiator hoses, then I recommend getting some nice colorful silicone ones for your build. I'll link some down below for you guys to check them out if you'd like. And the last little cooling extra that I have here for EJ engines is the Killer Bee water pump housing. So the little stock water pump housing is like a 90-degree fitting. So you can only imagine trying to shove liquid or fluid through a 90-degree bend, right? What the Killer Bee water pump housing actually does is smooth out that elbow to minimize turbulence and promote better cooling flow. I'll also have this great piece of engineering linked down below for you guys to check out if you'd like. Coming in at number 5 on the quest for reliability is for those who plan to modify their cars or even track them. But I guess you could even put them on your stock STi if you wish. But we're moving on to oiling components, specifically the oil pan, baffle, pickup tube, and windage tray. First up is your oil pickup tube. So in the stock STi, the oil pickup tube has an issue where the welds will crack and it'll essentially render your pickup tube useless. If that happens and your engine can't get the oil that it needs to stay lubricated, then you can pretty much bet that your car will blow up due to oil starvation. So the 2 brands that I usually see out on the market are IAG and Killer Bee, and these parts will come individually, but they also come as a kit. So you can decide whether or not you want to pick them up individually or as a kit. But if you're doing the work yourself and you're already taking off your oil pan, it's probably a good idea to replace all the components down there, but it's really up to you guys what you want to do. Next up is your oil pan. So it's not to say that your stock oil pan isn't good enough, but if you plan to modify your car to drive it spiritedly or even drive on a track, then a new oil pan is just for you. I'm going to say that the oil pans I'll be mentioning are typically baffled, and I'll explain that if you're on a track or just doing some spirited driving and taking some hard turns or cornering very hard, the oil in your engine pan will actually slosh to the opposing side at which you turn. And so it's possible that if you turn too hard and your oil is all sloshed to one side because of the G-force, then your oil tube will not pick up that oil. And as I just explained with the oil pickup tube, if your oil doesn't get picked up by the tube and your engine doesn't stay lubricated, then it's very, very possible that your engine will blow up due to oil starvation. So an upgraded oil pan will help with that, as well as increase your oil capacity. And whereas they are baffled, which just means there's almost like a little tray inside your oil pan that helps the oil from sloshing around, it'll definitely help you when you're driving your STi on a track or even a little bit more spiritedly. Next up, we'll go over the windage tray, and I'll try to briefly explain what the windage tray is good for. So windage is the flow of air within your crankcase. Each time a piston comes down in your cylinder bore, the air is pushed down behind it, and each time a cylinder goes up, the air is pulled up behind it. At the same time, the rotating assembly is spinning and churning air and adding oil into the mix as well. So the windage tray keeps the windage around your crankshaft from the oil in the oil pan. It allows the oil coming off the crank to easily enter your oil pan area without the windage affecting the scavenging of the oil that's already in your oil pan, if that makes sense. Now, it's not to say that your stock windage tray isn't as effective, but like I said, if you have all those parts already off, you may as well just replace all the components, as it'll be easier even if you plan to replace them in the future. Now, once again, I'll mention that all of these oiling components actually come in kits, typically from Killer Bee and IAG. So I'm not going to tell you how to spend your money, but me personally, when it comes to replacing my oiling components, I'll be definitely buying a kit because, as I said once again, if you're already down there doing it, you may as well replace all that you can in the event that you might want to replace other individual parts in the future. So you guys can make a decision on that, but I'll also link all the parts down below. 'Tis a new day once again, but coming in at number 6 on our reliability mods list is dedicated gauges. Now, dedicated gauges are especially useful because A, they add a sick aesthetic to the interior of your car, as well as tell you important things that the car is doing. And if monitored correctly, you can prevent a lot of damage, as gauges will typically tell you what's happening before it even happens. For example, let's get into a few gauges that I commonly see in the STIs. First off, we have the dedicated boost gauge. Now, the STi has its own stock boost gauge. However, getting an AEM dedicated boost gauge may be more accurate in the event that something goes wrong, because the information from your stock digital boost gauge has to run through the ECU before it can give you the information you need. And if for any reason that your ECU is freaking out, it may not read accurately. So if your car is legitimately over boosting, then your sweet dedicated gauge will tell you that, and you can then look into possibly replacing your turbo if that's an issue, or a boost controller, or whatever it may be. Next, we have the wideband AFR gauge. And for anyone who doesn't know what AFR stands for, it stands for air-fuel ratio. And this is something that can be important to monitor, because if your car is running too rich or too lean as you drive it, and you may not feel those effects right away, it may possibly damage your engine. So it's good to have a dedicated gauge telling you those things. Another common gauge that I see typically used in the STIs is an oil pressure gauge. And this is especially useful because, again, if you're driving along and you don't feel that your car is losing oil pressure, this gauge will tell you that your car is losing oil pressure before something bad happens and you possibly damage your engine. There are a few other types of dedicated gauges that you can get, such as temperature gauges that monitor oil temps, coolant temps, transmission temps. You can get speedometers, battery volt gauges, and so on. One dedicated gauge that I definitely plan to run whenever I get around to it is an oil temp gauge. If I'm not mistaken, the WRX actually comes with an oil temp gauge from the factory, but the STi does not. And it's definitely worth noting that these turbo cars are not necessarily great just to start up and start driving, especially in cold weather, because that matter of minutes of driving with the cold oil that possibly is too thick to get around to every portion of your engine can possibly cause engine damage. Now, when talking about dedicated gauges, a brand that I usually see used is AEM. Me personally, I plan to use AEM because that's the brand I typically see used, but there are plenty on the market, so you guys can definitely make a decision on that and go with whatever one that you like. Now it's worth mentioning that running dedicated gauges isn't as simple as it sounds as far as installing them goes, as typically they'll use an added fuse, so you need to run power, ground, and then run wiring to a dedicated sensor to the dedicated area that gauge is for. But either way, I'll be linking some of these gauges down below for you guys to check out. I swear this is the last day I'll be shooting a video, but coming in at number 7 on this list is getting a proper tune. So when you're starting to modify your STi, whether it be for some higher horsepower spirited driving or for a full-on track car, you absolutely need to tune for the parts that you're putting on your car, especially get a proper tune at that. There are a few exceptions for some parts that don't need a tune, but a good thing to follow is if you're changing any amount of air going into the engine, any amount of exhaust leaving the engine, or your fueling system, you absolutely need to get a tune for it, and a proper tune at that. Cobb off-the-shelf or OTS tunes are a thing, and even my very first thought process whenever I first got my STi was, oh, I'll go out and buy a Cobb SF intake and throw an OTS tune on it, for example. But there are so many variables that will play into that OTS tune, such as atmospheric pressure, depending on how high or low you are past sea level, as that will kind of affect the amount of oxygen that goes into your car to make the sweet power that we all want. My best recommendation is to kind of stay away from OTS tunes. Like, they're not exactly all that bad, but stay away from them. Either go to a dyno and get a pro tuned, or even get an e-tune and have the open road be your dyno. A bad tune will definitely ruin your car, so don't go to the guy who's only tuned like 2 Subarus. Try to find a reputable tuner for your application. It's worth mentioning that this can also kind of tie into the last portion of the video, which is gauges, because if you decide to go with a Cobb access port, for example, or even ECU Tech has some parameters that you can monitor, the access port will actually give you a lot of gauges and things like that. So do be aware of that it will kind of tie in with gauges, and it's really great to be able to monitor a lot of things that you can't monitor from stock or from factory. But either way, I know once I start to make some sauce and put all the parts on, I'll be getting my car tuned down in Nova Scotia at Symmetrical Auto Works, because they boast that they're the only all-wheel drive dyno in Eastern Canada, so I'll definitely be doing that. But just make sure that you guys get a proper tune for the parts that you put on your car, as it will immensely help your engine's longevity. So coming in at number 8 on this list is equal length headers, or in more technical terms, the exhaust manifold that has equal length runners. So your STi is equipped with unequal length headers from the factory. And while unequal length headers give us that signature Subi rumble that we all know and love, it is arguably known as the sound of inefficiency. Amongst other things, the unequal length headers are also what contribute to cylinders 2 and 4 getting so hot. So getting equal length headers will grant you benefits such as smooth exhaust energy delivery to your turbo, equalized exhaust pressure at each cylinder, equalized cylinder exhaust gas temperatures, and reduced chance of detonation and knock. One disadvantage that I see turn people away from equal length headers all the time is losing that signature Subi rumble that we all love. However, don't let that turn you away from having your engine run more efficiently. I want to assure you guys that your car will not sound like a Honda Civic if you swap your unequal length headers out for some good equal lengths. When talking about equal length headers, there are plenty of brands out there that sell them, such as Tomei, ETS, Perrin, but the one that I see used the most and the one that I'll recommend and probably use myself is Killer B, as I see people use them all the time and they seem to love them. It is worth mentioning that I've seen in some applications, this may not be every application, but in some applications I've seen the Perrin headers be installed, and actually one of the runners sat too close to the radiator fans and ended up melting them. So just be aware and do your research of which one you want to get and what would be the best application for your specific chassis. It's also worth mentioning that you are going to need a tune for equal length headers, as it changes the way the exhaust leaves your engine. But it will free up some horsepower, so definitely get a tune when installing one of these guys onto your STi. I'll have the Killer B Holy headers linked below if you guys want to check those out as well. Alright, so the last thing I'll touch on before I end this long ass video is a few little things, such as like a built block. So if you're going to be pushing some more horsepower, it'd be a good idea to get some forged internals into your block to make sure that you're running reliably. I want to say it's around like 400 wheel horsepower that you're going to want to do this, and it's also worth mentioning that 2019 Plus, if I'm not mistaken, they have RA internals, so they come a little bit more forged from the factory, if that makes sense. So if you're installing parts and modifying your car and want to make it a little bit more reliable and hopefully prevent your engine from blowing up, I definitely recommend either buying a pre-built short block or building one yourself with some forged internals. There are a few little extra items such as oil coolers, as oil coolers will help cool your oil, I guess, whenever you're thrashing your car a little bit more, because if it gets too hot and it gets too thin, then it might not be able to do its job properly and lubricate your engine, and that can cause some damage. So there's that. And one of the last little ones would be installing an external wastegate on your turbo, or getting a turbo that doesn't even have an internal wastegate. It can only be externally gated, because that'll take a lot of stress off of your turbo and help mitigate boost pressure. But that's it for you guys. I hope you guys got all the info you need to help make your Subaru a little bit more reliable and to help it from blowing up. I had fun, I had a lot of fun editing this video, and hope to hone my editing skills more to bring you guys some more quality content in the future. So let me know in the comments if you guys have any like informative things that you would like me to touch on, and I'll make a video on it for you. I have no problem doing that. I'll also be coming out with an install video soon on my rear sub. I'm just kind of waiting for the weather to die down a little bit, because it's been a little too cold as for Eastern Canada. Like, we got down to minus 50 degrees Celsius the other day. So I mean, I'm just kind of waiting for it to warm up, and then I'll definitely give you guys a nice little install video on that. You guys know what to do though. Like and subscribe and help me reach my goal of 100 subscribers. I would very much appreciate it. But anyway, I hope you guys have a good morning, a good afternoon, a good evening, wherever you are in this world, or whenever you may be watching this video. I will definitely see you guys in the next one. Peace out.